Hello everyone, I'm Chester44 and welcome to this Let's Play of Blades of Avernum. Last episode we began hearing the Priestess's story. She was a priestess of the Chapel of Compassion, but her beliefs aren't quite as... well, she's confused in a way. Someone showed up on the doorstep who she saw was a bandit, and even though bandits cause all these things that the Chapel of Compassion fights against, when the father took him in to heal him, she just didn't understand why. And she's been angry about it this whole time, believing that taking in a bandit would only bring problems. And it appears it did. As after they took him in and healed him, the bounty hunters showed up. It seems he managed to kill everyone else in the chapel in his attempt to get Christopher Sly. Obviously that's who he's been going for. It's been shown throughout all the other stories. And also, obviously, he must have missed him. We also saw how the chapel burned down. It turned out she went after the bounty hunter in a rage with a torch and dropped it in the fight. No idea how she got out, though. I approached the horse slowly, not wanting to spook it. I didn't have to worry, it was a docile animal, the ears having worn away any rebelliousness it once possessed. It didn't object to my approach, even when I took the reins and clumsily pulled myself onto its back. I rode away from the chapel, never looking back and hardly breathing until I was far enough that the smell of smoke and ash no longer hung in the air. When I reached the main road, I turned north towards Sigacel, for lack of a better destination. By all reports, the capital city was a den of corruption and evil, but if I went looking for somewhere that wasn't, I'd be searching for quite some time. The horse trotted slowly down the road without any guidance or intervention on my part, which was good because I'm not much of a horseman. I allowed myself to nod off into a restless sleep, the stress and exhaustion of the day finally catching up to me. I stayed in a sense of restless half-sleep for several hours, the horse's rhythmic swaying and the steady clap of hooves on dirt path competing with sheer exhaustion to see who'd win out. Eventually, though, the clump of hooves on dirt gave way to the clack of hooves on cobblestone, startling me from the equilibrium I'd reached. I reined the horse in sharply. I'd arrived. The sun was just rising over the tops of the trees to the east, and its rays now sparkled off the water of the moat and turned the grey city walls a dull red. I'd ridden all night. At my gentle prodding, the horse resumed its steady trot towards the colossal city. The chapel was like a palace compared to the peasants' huts and farmhouses I'd seen, but this was something entirely on a different level. There were guards walking the ramparts and standing watch at the gate, armed men ready to strike down the wicked and help up the weak. This was where I'd been looking for. This is what the order should have been. I'd known all along, at some level at least. If only they had understood. I'd reached Sigacel, and though I hadn't had any plans in mind when I set off, things seemed more promising now that I was here. I wasn't going to turn back. Suddenly, the guard watching the gate grabbed hold of the reins and brought the horse to a halt. He must have been trying to get my attention before, because he seemed cross when he addressed me. You always go riding right through checkpoints in this? God damn, the better they look. One of his fellows guffawed loudly, a hoarse, barking laugh. I didn't understand why, I was just trying to get into the city. I just want to enter, I'm not causing problems. I see. And what business do you have in our fair city? I'm just visiting. I had to think a while to come up with an answer. Not because I wanted to deceive him, I never imagined you'd have to lie to get past the gates, but because I had never thought about why I'd come here. The answer just blurted out because I couldn't come up with a real answer, and I could see the guard was growing impatient with my silence. Alright, whatever. And who are you here with? I'm by myself, there's nobody else. His eyes widened. Whatever, it's your life. He waved me through, shaking his head in bewilderment as we passed. Week's liquor rations as we pull her out of the harbour tonight. But I was already riding away and was too enraptured by the city to hear his comment to his fellow. What appeared to be 3 major roads intersected at the courtyard ahead. In my mind, anything paved was a main road, but I thought that these seemed large even for Sigacel's gargantuan standards. As wide as they were still packed with people hustling about their early morning business. Everybody I saw moved quickly about their own affairs, without speaking or even looking at those around them. Apparently the moment they left my sight they started hollering, though, because somebody had to be making the great din that filled the streets. Guards stood at the edges of the courtyard, watching the crowds lazily. The people, for their part, seemed to prefer to ignore their presence. They hurried by with heads down, and on the off chance they made eye contact, they quickly glanced away. The crowd was even denser on the road to the north, where a great mob of people filled the street. I rode forward, intrigued to see what brought all these people out. The sign called this Waterfront Run, and the increasing number of less reputable taverns down the road attested that this did indeed lead to the harbor. Harbors are cesspits of crime, blights on otherwise fair cities. I had no interest in visiting one. The dilapidated buildings ahead appeared to be private homes. I didn't have any business here in the residence district. I rode slowly into the crowd. Regardless of how densely packed the people ahead were, they always somehow found the space to let me squeeze past. The crowd ahead was nearly wall-to-wall people. There was no way I could ride a horse through that without trampling somebody. I dismounted and began searching for a place to lead the animal while I went on ahead. A brightly painted sign caught my attention. I pushed through the crowd on my way towards it. "The Swinging Scoundrel," the sign said. A man with a noose about his neck was painted above the inn's name. Adorable. I moved to one of the hitching posts out front and secured the reins to it. It was probably reserved for customers, although the thought didn't cross my mind at the time. This taken care of, I proceeded to make my way towards the source of the crowd. The Swinging Scoundrel. No fighting. A man with a noose around his neck adorns this inn's sign. Vinny's Vehicles. The courtyard ahead was dominated by a massive stone building that spanned the entire north end of the square. The main building was several stories tall, and a great spiraling tower soared into the sky another 20 stories at least. It was constructed of rough stone blocks and was designed simply, with narrow windows spaced evenly across each floor, and little imagination in its strictly functional form. This wasn't the reason for the hubbub, though. Everyone's attention was focused on a small wooden platform sitting at the steps of the colossal stone building. The platform was empty, but was ringed by guards with their halberds held out to ward back the surging crowd. I waded further into the boiling human sea, struggling to reach the platform and discover what was going on. One last squeeze between a pair of sweaty dockmen brought me to the space I'd spotted. Without all the heads in front of me, I could finally behold the stage. It was empty, to my great disappointment. There were 5 T-shaped poles sticking out of the platform, but I doubted that was the reason everyone had come here. I was about to turn and go, but a voice from the crowd brought me to a halt. "Here to see the spectacle." Although there was a constant buzz of voices in the courtyard, I somehow picked out this one, and knew that it was directed at me. I turned to find the speaker, a middle-aged man standing next to me in the crowd. His only hair was a thick brown mustache, for his head was shaved completely bald, and judging by his even tan, it had been for some time. He was a large, broad-shouldered man, but I didn't feel threatened by him. He seemed friendly, and perhaps he'd prove helpful as well. "I guess so. What exactly are we all standing here for again?"
"Why, it's the first Saturday, my lady, and everyone's here for the same reason they come every other first Saturday. And I'm here. Well, I'm not really sure why I come here anymore. It's the least I can do, I guess."
"I'm afraid I don't follow."
"Oh, I'm sorry, are you not from the city? Well, you chose an interesting time to visit. It's Execution Saturday, you see, the one day of the month that brings our fair city together, when estranged neighbours stand side by side and lift their voices, when the debtor and the loan shark can put aside their affairs to cheer together. A day that brings out the best in all of us. Oh, but you'll see for yourself."
My eyes followed his pointing finger towards the doors of the large stone building to the north. The doors had been thrown open and a stream of guards filed out. In the center of the procession were several manacled men and women. The rest of the crowd noticed their presence simultaneously, erupting into a deafening roar. The procession moved forward towards the platform, right into the thickest part of the crowd. Somehow the densely packed onlookers made room for them to pass, parting as they approached and falling back into place behind them the moment they were past. So it was that the procession reached the platform unhindered. Their purpose gradually dawned on me. A lot of the things the man had said made no sense to me, but I was sure that he'd called it an execution. Was that what I'd come to see? I looked on with horrified fascination. The crowd had begun to chant as the procession climbed the steps to the tops of the platform. Each prisoner was led to one of the T-shaped posts, the gallows. The word popped into my head, although I'm not sure where I heard it.
We hunted every last one of those sons of bitches down, left them hanging there to rot. Justice has been served. Your folks can rest in peace, Adriana.
I struggled to push away the memories that were bubbling up from the depths of my mind. Fortunately, the man next to me spoke up again, giving me an excuse to look away from the gallows and the memories they had stirred up. Wait, what did you say?
I asked if you were all right. You looked rather pale. This kind of stuff isn't for everyone, you know. I'd be more than willing to clear a way out for you if you want to leave.
No, I'm fine. Who are these men anyhow? Bandits?
Bandits? Lass, if Cromwell were half as hard on bandits as he is on authors, the countryside would be safe to walk at night. During the day, too, for that matter. No, you won't find any bandits at these gallows. Writers, dissenters, wizards, debtors, they're who fill the prisons.
Disappointing. What's everyone hollering about?
They're jeering, child, because that's what you do in an execution. This Saturday, though, they came out to jeer at one man in particular.
He pointed at the man in the center gibbet. He was a hard-faced man who stared back at the crowd defiantly.
Have you heard of Cedric Durant? The Cascadanca killing spree? He was an assassin responsible for a string of murders in the capital, mostly government officials and aristocrats. He is to be executed today after 6 years rotting in the hangman's tower.
He indicated the massive tower I'd noticed rising above the stone building to the north.
Probably the only one that deserves it, depending on who you talk to.
I watched with grim fascination as the guard lowered a black hood over the assassin's thin face, hiding his wrathful eyes. Without them, he was much less imposing. He was a thin man, weakened by malnutrition and years in a prison cell. He wore a blue uniform with a strange flag emblem on the breast, which the years had reduced to little more than rags. Pathetic, almost. My thoughts were interrupted by the twang of a bowstring. An arrow seemed to grow out of the chest of one of the guards, sending him toppling off the platform. For a moment everything seemed frozen. Then pandemonium erupted. Bolts fired from somewhere out in the crowd rained down on the guards. The crowd, which had been shocked into momentary silence, roared again. This time nobody was cheering. People scrambled over one another in a mad dash to get as far from the gallows as possible. It crossed my mind that I too should flee this place, but I couldn't take my eyes off the gallows. Pierced guards screamed in agony. Townsfolk shrieked in terror and the officer in charge was bellowing orders in an effort to organize a defense. And I just stood in dumb silence. A terrific clamor was coming from the south, a rattling, thumping, roaring sound that sent any townsfolk that hadn't fled yet into a mad scurry for cover. Finding myself alone in the street, I pried my eyes from the gallows and slowly turned to see the source of the racket. It was a 2-horse cart filled with blue-armored men bearing a strangely familiar flag emblem. My mind was moving so slowly I couldn't think. I couldn't move. The courtyard had fallen silent except for the sound of my own heavy breathing and the pounding of the horses' hooves. The horses' flaring nostrils and rolling eyes drew closer. They were coming straight at me, but still I didn't make to move. The cart was almost on top of me. The horses must have realized that they were going to collide with me, but the frenzied whipping of the driver didn't allow them to turn their course. Or maybe their minds were moving as slowly as mine. The realization struck me that I'd waited too long, that even if I acted now I would not avoid the cart. It was a matter-of-fact realization. There was no regret or fear or desperation accompanying it, just a knowledge of what would happen next. For once I knew exactly what was coming. But it didn't come. An explosion went off in the back of the cart, launching blue-armored men in all directions. The cart was sent skidding off the track, riding precariously on 2 wheels for several yards and staying upright only by a miracle. I felt the rush of air as the wheels skimmed past my face. Then something slammed into me from behind, sending me sprawling to the ground.
You're alright! Thank fate, we gotta get the hell out of here!
I felt myself being lifted and propelled forward, half stumbling under my own power and half being dragged. Dazed and confused, I allowed myself to be guided by my benefactor, whoever it was. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in an alley, the red-haired man from earlier standing over me.
What the hell were you doing? Were you trying to get yourself killed back there?
Never mind, forget about it. You aren't hurt, that's what matters. Can you walk? Are you feeling well enough to walk? What the hell just happened?
You almost got run down by a horse cart, and did remarkably little to prevent it. No matter. Fortunately, you're still alive, but these are things that should be discussed elsewhere.
All right, well, I can stand, I think. He led me to a tavern in the waterfront district, the Spray. It was a slightly more desirable place to be than the alley. The red-haired man offered some food and drink, which I ate despite my better judgment. I don't really know much about tavern going, but I know you don't eat at places like the Spray if you can help it. I was famished, though. The serving girl came and cleared the plates away. The red-haired man remained silent this whole time, content to leave me to my thoughts and my meal. He probably could tell what bad shape I was in. He'd have had to be blind not to. I spoke first, since he wasn't willing to intrude. What was going on back there?
A rescue attempt. They drove the cart right up to the gallows, got their man, and rode off. Almost trampled you in the process. Those blue-armored men organized it, although if I'm not deceived, I still saw Durant standing at the gallows after the cart rode away. Doesn't make a bit of sense.
Thanks for saving me.
It's no problem. I don't suppose I can take much of the credit anyhow. I got there too late. It was pure luck and a timely fireball that saved you.
Well, thanks anyway. I hardly even know you, though.
The name's Ethan. I'm a traveling merchant, although I've been cutting back on the traveling of late because of the danger. I guess that just makes me a plain old shopkeeper. I miss the road, though. I miss the days when I could escape to the wilderness. The days spent traveling without seeing a single soul.
So you don't like Sigasal?
A city is a city, Adriana. There will be evil no matter where you go. It's just the way of things. Sometimes, though, like on the first Saturdays, I tire of this city. There are places where neighbors speak to each other, where distrust doesn't keep people from greeting the people they see in the streets. There are places where men do not cheer for each other's blood, and sometimes I wonder why I am here instead of one of those places.
So why do you go to the executions if you dislike them so much?
I have asked myself the same question many a time, and always I reach the same conclusion. Because it will happen regardless of whether I go. I may not support Lord Cromwell, but he represents the city and everyone in it, including myself. His decisions are my decisions, and when he sentences a man to die, so too do I. So I go to the gallows every first Saturday to watch them, and I try to understand who they are, to learn their past, their crimes, and their stories. It is not easy, this information is often not made public, but I do my best. I owe it to them to not ignore that this is happening. It is the least I can do.
Wait, so you know about every single one of the prisoners today?
Yes. I have already told you about Durant, but every fool in the city knows his story. But what about the man on his left? Who knows about him? I do. He was accused of having an affair with an aristocrat's wife and lost his life for a man's pride. Or the woman on the right. She was a servant accused of stealing from Lord Cromwell's estate. Oddly enough, though, she was also one of his mistresses. What a convenient way to dispose of her when the lady began to grow suspicious. Or the man on the opposite side. He was sentenced to death for attacking one of Lord Cromwell's officers after he found out he had assaulted his wife. But nobody knows about that. They don't know about the non-celebrities. Nobody knows why they are killing them. They jeer just the same, but they don't know why.
What about the last man, the one who escaped?
He was a writer who criticized Cromwell before he came to power. He warned of his tyranny and urged the people to elect a new governor, but went unheeded. Even after his coup, he remained outspoken against Cromwell right up until his arrest. He was arrested on charges of inciting a riot, but was released due to insufficient evidence. 2 days later, he was arrested again, this time on trumped charges of illegal wizardry. He was convicted and sentenced to death.
I don't understand. None of them really did anything. Where are the thieves and murderers?
Roaming the streets, mostly. The courts don't waste their time with them. They know that if they're to rid the city of men desperate enough to kill and steal, they'll have to do more than haul people off to jail. Men are given to do evil, yes, but these are often crimes of necessity, not malice. A good man will steal as soon as an evil man when he must feed his family, and neither will consider whether he might end up at the gallows. He does what he must. They do not threaten order, so they are left to harass the rest of the populace. But if you talk about changing things for the better, so that nobody needs to steal to live, your neck will certainly wind up in a noose. It's the way things are around here. It's why Cromwell is still in power, and why we haven't had an election in recent memory.
So what happens now to the 4 who were left?
Once order is restored, they will waste no time in executing them. If they are still alive right now, I would be shocked.
So you missed the execution this time?
Yes, I suppose I did. But there were more important things to be done. You were in no condition to watch an execution, and I couldn't leave you there. What brought you there, anyway? You don't seem like the type for a scene like that. You wear a priestess's robes. Where are you from, and what brings you to Sigasal?
I'm an acolyte of the Order of Compassion, and I'm not really sure why I'm here.
Order of Compassion, eh? Funny place to meet you, considering.
He chuckled, but it wasn't a mean laugh.
I like the sound of that, though. Sounds appropriate. I'm surprised I've never heard of it. Where is it located?
Don't bother looking for it. It burned to the ground last night. I found myself spilling the whole story, from my first days at the chapel right up to the fire and everything in between. All the work I watched the Order do, my lessons, the things Father K used to teach me, it all came tumbling out. It felt like a great weight lifted from my shoulders. It left me drained but relieved. Ethan nodded slowly. I could see that things were falling into place in his mind. He was beginning to make sense of the wreck across from him.
I'm sorry to hear that. Sorry to hear something happened to a place like that.
Don't be. It didn't work anyways. They're all dead now, and they didn't make a bit of difference.
Perhaps not. But charity is a slow-growing seed, and it takes a long while to reap the benefits of work like that. One day, perhaps. Or maybe you're right, and it was all in vain. You knew them better than I, certainly, but doing what is right and falling short is better than doing what is wrong and succeeding. Keep that in mind.
He stood from the table abruptly. I looked up questioningly. He answered my unspoken question as he fastened his cloak.
It's been a pleasure meeting you, Adriana, but I'm afraid I must cut our chit-chat short. There's business I must attend to, and I'm afraid it's not possible for you to come along.
He set a purse on the table.
I'm leaving you with enough to spend the week in an inn. No, don't protest, just take it. I couldn't rest easy if I knew you didn't have it.
He held out his hand, which I took.
If our paths don't cross again, it was nice meeting you.
I stammered my thanks, trying to put all the gratitude I felt into words. He shrugged it off.
It was nothing, really. Don't mention it.
Are you really going out? But there's a criminal on the loose. My call brought him to a halt at the doorway. He turned and smiled.
But Adriana, there are always criminals on the loose. Farewell and good luck. Don't take shit from anyone around here and you'll be all right. You're tougher than you think.
With that he was gone, and I was alone again. I sat there for a while, thinking about what had happened that day, about what had happened at the chapel and what I'd seen in front of the courthouse. Perhaps most of all I thought about what Ethan had said. I stayed there until the inn had emptied out. It was growing dark outside, and I had been cooped up in the spray all afternoon. The sun was low in the sky when I left the inn. I set off without a clear goal in my mind, just enjoying wandering the salty, stench-filled streets, perhaps against better judgment. It was dark, and I was alone in a shady part of a shady city, but I wasn't afraid. The once crowded streets were nearly empty now. A few sailors and other locals wandered about, but they hurried about their way, eager to get safely to wherever they headed. I was left alone with my thoughts.
And here I'm going to end this episode. Seems another decent pause point. The Priestess's story is quite a long story as well. It's connecting through everything in its way. Literally, it's gone from before the night story to we're going to bookend with the night story again, eventually. Long after everything that happened with the other two stories.
I feel like she's going to encounter Sly again in just a few moments. But we'll find out what happens in the next episode. Till then, I'm Chester44, that is a Priestess. This has been a Blades of Avernum Let's Play, and I shall see you all next time.